What if the villains of the DC universe all disappeared and were replaced by the greatest threats from anime and manga? How would the DC heroes stack up? Who would each of them end up fighting to protect the world, and would they even stand a chance? Today I'll be taking a look at some of the most premier DC heroes, Superman, the Teen Titans, Wonder Woman, and more, and picking 3 new villains for each of them to face based on their powers, personalities, and themes. I'll explain how their confrontations would go down, what they'd clash over, and then I'll tell you who each hero's arch-nemesis would be. I really tried to get a wide spread and find villains that would make for the best possible stories. And remember, it's just the villains who've crossed over into DC's world, so Naruto and Luffy aren't here to help. If you don't like my matchups or have a better idea, be sure to let me know down in those comments. I'll try to respond to as many as I can. Alright, let's hop to it. First up, the big blue Boy Scout himself, everybody's favorite Kryptonian, Superman. Blessed with an alien biology and the good old-fashioned family values, Clark Kent defends the world of DC using his flight, super strength, heat vision, freeze breath, and more, all with a warm smile and an outstretched hand. Superman is incredibly powerful, often considered the most powerful metahuman on the planet, and so his villains have to challenge him with their own array of wacky powers. A good Superman story really leans into the comic bookiness of the world and its characters, playing with crazy sci-fi or fantasy elements, sending Clark to another dimension, shrinking him down super small, turning his best friend Jimmy into a giant rampaging monkey using a magic amulet. But at the heart of it all, they're human stories about a guy who just wants to do the right thing in a world that increasingly becomes harder and harder to do. Some of Superman's greatest villains include Darkseid, the intergalactic new god of evil and tyranny, Brainiac, the alien superintelligence hell-bent on conquering all life in the universe to keep in his libraries, and Lex Luthor, megalomaniac multi-billionaire who hates Superman with a deeply burning envy. In a world without these villains, we'll need to pick anime bad guys that can challenge Superman's strength with their own incredible powers and resources, and also clash with his intrinsic desire towards kindness. Who could possibly live up to those qualifications? Well, how about the Dominator of the Universe? A title that's as over-the-top as the man himself, Lord Boros from One Punch Man is the leader of the Dark Matter Thieves, a spacefaring warlord who scours the galaxy for a worthy opponent after being cursed with immortality and unmatched strength. He's basically what happens when you give a god-tier warrior nothing but boredom for centuries. He travels to planets and tears them to shreds, hoping a powerful hero will rise to meet him, never finding a real challenge. In terms of raw power, Boros is an absolute monster. Regenerative abilities, planet-wiping energy blasts, and a final form that multiplies his strength exponentially. When Boros' ship lands on Earth and begins with an enormous city-crushing laser blast, Superman would be the first one on the scene, probably starting by grabbing the whole thing and pushing it back up into space before he moves to tear it apart. When Boros sees this incredible strength on display, he'd excitedly rush to see his new enemy and attack Superman with all his might. And this fight would be totally sick, yeah. But beyond the spectacle, Boros represents an important idea for Superman to consider. What happens when someone with great strength tries to find their limit? What if they don't like what they find? Can we discover fulfillment in a world where you barely have to try? It's a problem central to the character of Saitama, but I don't think Superman has ever had to consider it before. He would absolutely empathize with Boros, offering him the fight he's always wanted. But after he wins, Superman wouldn't kill him. He'd offer his response as he traps the villain in the Phantom Zone. The reason Boros' existence as the strongest wasn't fulfilling is because being the best or the strongest isn't what matters in life. His pride and the thrill of a fight will never make him happy, not really. Especially not at the cost of innocent lives. And coming from the one man actually stronger than him, I think this might actually convince Boros to change. But let's take a step back from cosmic threats for a moment. Superman normally fights Brainiac and Darkseid, sure, but many of his threats are homegrown from right here on Earth, like the notorious Demon Lord All For One, a name that's less of a title and more of a philosophy carved into the bones of the world he's trying to shape. He's the shadow behind Japan's villain underworld, a mastermind who once ruled with absolute power by stealing quirks from others and bending them to his will. Centuries old, sustained by stolen abilities and unrelenting ambition, All For One is an embodiment of control, legacy, and domination. His power set is a terrifying arsenal of quirks layered and fused together, allowing him to counter almost any opponent, tank catastrophic damage, and strike with overwhelming force. In DC's world, he would function almost like a Mazo, able to steal the powers of any metahuman he comes across, and I can see that making him untouchable for hundreds of years, until Superman makes his debut in Metropolis. All For One would be fascinated by this supposedly unbeatable metahuman and start by sending various Nomus after him to try to defeat and capture him. But as Superman defeats every single one, he would eventually make the jaunt to Metropolis himself and challenge Superman where he's most vulnerable, surrounded by very mortal civilians. I can see this being an insane knockdown drag-out brawl, All For One using his almost limitless sea of quirks to wear down Clark, making his ears bleed with high-frequency sound waves, weakening his powers by creating electromagnetic waves similar to red sunlight or maybe even kryptonite, and calling in Nomus to help when Clark is on the ropes. But I think Superman would overcome him in the end, catching the villain off guard just as his powers are about to be stolen with a blast of heat vision right in his eyes. This would leave All For One with his iconic nutsack face and put him in a weak enough state to be detained with power-dampening cuffs and shipped off to Belle Reve prison. But now disfigured and defeated for the first time, AFO would develop a burning hatred and thirst for revenge, all aimed right at the Big Blue Boy Scout, exactly like his hatred for All Might. So at this point, we've seen Superman face the wandering space tyrant and the calculating businessman supervillain. For his greatest foe, how about the calculating businessman who's also a space tyrant? Emperor of the Universe, Lord Frieza from Dragon Ball Z, is a monster whose name alone sends shivers across galaxies. Born into a lineage of destruction, Frieza was gifted with absurd power from the start, and he used it to carve out an empire built on fear, genocide, and profit. He wiped out entire civilizations like there were ants under his boot, most infamously the Saiyan race, just to prevent any potential threat to his rule. Frieza's powers include near-limitless energy focused into destructive blasts, superhuman speed, multiple transformations that ratchet up his strength, and a durability that lets him survive the vacuum of space and come back from the brink of death. He represents cruelty with polish, a refined evil that's elegant and intentional. As odd as it may seem, I think he's the perfect Lex Luthor analog. Once considered the greatest man, who was loved and feared everywhere, every word he speaks drips with this sense of superiority. But when the Kryptonian defeats Lord Boros and word spreads throughout the galaxy, it draws Frieza's attention to Earth. Who is this little pissant who thinks he can make a name for himself? And then when people within the Frieza Empire start hoping Superman will liberate them from him, that's the final straw. He makes his assault on Earth, only to be met with a kind and welcoming Superman who asks for the new visitor's name. Frieza would start by offering Clark a job, but when he learns of Frieza's deeds, the two would clash. And if you're not buying their rivalry yet, just like Lex, Frieza is also bald. I don't know how much more perfect this can be, but he also offers the greatest power Superman's ever faced. With the strength to detonate planets with a single finger, this would be Clark's greatest physical challenge. And when he finally manages to win and capture Frieza in the Phantom Zone, there would be a subtle fear always prickling at the back of his mind for the very first time in his life. And I think that makes for an excellent arch-nemesis material. Moving on to our next hero, or should I say heroes, the Teen Titans. A found family of outcasts, prodigies, and reformed threats trying to carve out their own place in a world that doesn't always take them seriously. Led by Batman's former protege Robin, the team includes powerhouses like Starfire, a runaway alien princess, Raven, the half-demon fighting to suppress her father's darkness, Beast Boy, a shapeshifter masking his trauma with humor, and Cyborg, caught between man and machine. Together, they bring a mix of raw potential and emotional vulnerability that makes their battles just as much about growing up as they are about saving the day. Their enemies, like Slade, the Hive, the Brotherhood of Evil, often reflect their deepest fears: loss of identity, betrayal, control, and the fear of becoming what they're fighting against. The Titans are about growing into who you are when the world expects you to fail, and learning that strength is about holding each other up. When we look at good anime villains to take them on, I definitely want to include at least one team, so the group has a unique dynamic with a bunch of different characters at once. I also want to really play with some of the core themes of being a teenager, dealing with parental authority, the fear of the future and how you're changing, and the ways you might try and tackle that fear. Which leads me to my first pick, Orochimaru is known as one of the legendary Sannin from Naruto. A mad scientist of ninjutsu, he's a serpent in human form, endlessly shedding his skin in pursuit of immortality and forbidden knowledge. His abilities are as horrifying as they are impressive: body possession, regeneration, summoning giant snakes, and a vast arsenal of stolen techniques gathered over decades. Once a respected shinobi of the Leaf Village, Orochimaru turned against his people after growing obsessed with mastering every jutsu and escaping the limits of the human body. In the world of DC, I can see him gaining notoriety as a serial killer, whose victims always show up mutilated or mutated into hideous monsters that terrorize the general population. I can see the Titans running into one of his experiments during their early days as a team, discovering another teenager lured in and transformed by the power of Orochimaru's curse mark. Robin would try to defeat him on his own, but be massively overpowered, and have to be saved by Cyborg and Starfire. This would wound his pride as a team leader and combatant, which would put him in the perfect mental state for Orochimaru's manipulation. We'd basically get an allegory story for performance-enhancing drugs. Robin enticed to get a curse mark just like Sasuke was, with the promise of it making him strong enough to stand by his superpowered teammates. But when Orochimaru inevitably betrays him and tries to take over his body, it would be up to Raven's dark magic to find a way to safely remove the mark from his body. And a reminder from Beast Boy that the team doesn't value Robin because he can punch the hardest. Just like he sometimes turns into a hummingbird and sometimes a gorilla, different skills are useful in different situations, and no one has a mind or a will like Robin. So with the team back together and Robin learning to trust in the power of the other Titans, toppling the Snake Sannin would be their first step as a true team. Which is just in time for their next opponent, the League of Villains from My Hero Academia. A scrappy band of misfits with a grudge against Hero Society that eventually turned into the most dangerous insurgent force in the world. Their hatred started from the disillusionment and wreckage left by the hero system. The League gathered those abandoned, overlooked, or broken by a world obsessed with idealized strength. At the center is Tomura Shigaraki, a walking extinction event with the power to disintegrate anything he touches, backed by a crew whose abilities are as wild and unstable as the trauma that shaped them. Warp gates, sentient decay, bloodthirsty transformation, and more. As they evolve, so does their purpose. They stop being rebels lashing out and start becoming symbols of collapse. The League challenges the idea that heroism is working, exposing the cracks in a society built on selective justice and PR smiles. And I think they would absolutely set their sights on the Teen Titans for recruitment. Think about it, they're all freaks and outcasts, and Robin explicitly began his tenure as team leader by rejecting the tutelage of one of the world's greatest heroes, Batman. I think Shigaraki would show up unannounced at Titan's Tower, decaying the front doorway, offering a proposition. Join the League and help tear down Hero Society, the one that rejects and looks down on them. Now, this wouldn't go too well, but their fights would be so much fun. Robin using his wits and gadgets to avoid getting caught by Shiggy's decay, Starfire and her loose grasp on social customs just getting absolutely discombobulated trying to talk down both Twice and Toga, and Raven has an edgy dad-hating contest with Dabi. The variety in powers and abilities across the two teams would make for a spectacular showcase, and I think their first fight would cement a rivalry that could last for years. But if you want a perfect villain for a group of teenagers trying to figure their flaws out, can you do any better than a parental figure who willingly removed all his flaws and turned them into weapons? I'm talking about Father from Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood. Father was the first homunculus, an ancient being born from the blood of a man who dared to challenge God, and the twisted architect behind centuries of suffering. Perhaps the DC version of Father was sealed away centuries ago by a previous Dr. Fate or the Wizard Shazam. In any case, he'd be spinning a plan here in the present to capture Raven, to use her blood connection to Trigon to claim the power of God for himself. Originally a shapeless creature born from the experiments of the Xerxes king, Father gained a physical form by sacrificing an entire nation, using its souls to become something terrifying, a man without limits, driven by a need to purge himself of all human flaws. From him came the 7 homunculi, each one a fragment of his discarded sins: pride, envy, wrath, lust, gluttony, greed, and sloth. walking weapons that carry out his will with grotesque devotion. And these 7 sinful weapons would be the tools he uses to wear down the Titans through combat, sure, but more importantly, emotional manipulation. Imagine Envy transforming into Raven to play with Beast Boy's heart and trick him into revealing information. Cyborg being approached by lust and greed with a proposal. Betray the Titans and they will give him a Philosopher's Stone, which he can use to get his original body back. As good-hearted as he is, I think he'd really struggle with this decision and the temptation of his return to normalcy. I think the homunculi in their inhuman forms play with a lot of the same themes of body horror, love, humanity, and self-acceptance that good Titan stories are known for, and if Father does actually achieve his plan of attaining godhood, he can only be stopped by Raven ascending to her most primal state of power, White Raven. While the Titans are usually dealing with existential nightmares in Jump City, things tend to be a little lighter in the Midwest. That's where the Flash, Wally West, protects Keystone City. The fastest man alive, Wally is the heart of the Flash legacy. Originally Kid Flash, Wally stepped into Barry Allen's boots after the hero sacrificed himself to save all of reality. What followed was one of the most well-earned character evolutions in comics, as Wally leveled up from sidekick to symbol. He used to be slower than Barry, but after breaking through his mental inhibitors, he became the Speed Force in motion, capable of time travel, phasing through solid matter, creating vortexes, and thinking faster than any human brain has a right to. But Wally's real strength isn't his powers, it's his empathy, his humor, and his refusal to give up on people, even when the whole world forgets he exists. He's the Flash who remembers everything, even when no one remembers him. Wally's story is all about legacy and identity, about living in someone else's shadow, but becoming a brighter light. When everything moves at light speed, he's the one who slows down just enough to remind you why you're running in the first place. So when picking out anime villains, I wanted to find characters that first could challenge Wally's absolutely ridiculous speed, either with their own speed or other powers, but I also wanted villains who would be a good match for him personally. He's super chill and jovial for a superhero, so I'm not going to pit him up against anyone really edgy or hyper-violent. My first pick, another crazy fast speedster who's also paradoxically chill. Kizaru from One Piece. Real name Admiral Borzolino, he always moves and talks like he's half asleep, but don't let his lazy drawl fool you. He is a walking nuke owned by the world government, and one of the most terrifying people to be caught by in the Grand Line. With the power of the Glint Glint fruit, Kizaru becomes light itself, allowing him to move at impossible speeds, fire laser-precise attacks, and kick with the force of a meteor. Even though he's a Marine, he doesn't fight for justice or honor. He is a cog in the machine, enforcing the law without passion or mercy. Kizaru is the face of institutional violence wrapped in a pair of flashy sunglasses, a reminder that when power serves the system, it doesn't have to look evil to be dangerous. In DC, I think he would still represent that cold, unfeeling enforcer of the government, but instead of the Marines, he'd work for a different corrupt establishment, maybe Amanda Waller or a President Lex Luthor. He'd be sent to defend any shady dealings of the US government, a cover-up in a suit jacket who deletes any and all evidence of illegal activity faster than anyone can notice. Well, almost anyone. I can see Kizaru flying over Keystone at light speed to disappear a witness in an upcoming trial that could implicate the president, only for his hand to be caught mid-assassination by a very concerned Wally, who just happened to spot him on his morning jog. The two would exchange a few words, both very entertained by the concept of someone else who can keep up with them, but it would very quickly, pun intended, devolve into a fight. That would be very interesting. See, Flash can move faster than light. When he really pushes himself, he can move billions of times faster. But Kizaru isn't just fast, he is a Logia fruit user, meaning his body is made of light. You can't touch him unless he lets you, or you have hockey. I think. The Speed Force can do all sorts of weird shit. Maybe it would let Flash interact with Kizaru's light form. But if not, what would start as a race would end with Flash zipping around and tripping up Kizaru by placing prisms in his way, forcefully redirecting him using glass until he manages to trap him in some sort of mirror box, or speed steel to ground him in place. It would be the exact kind of bonkers, bogus sci-fi that makes Flash stories so much fun, and I think Wally and Borzolino would legit look forward to the times they get to clash again in the future, a friendly but serious rivalry. And in that same vein, I think the Flash's friendly relationship with the Rogues would be perfectly replaced by Team Rocket, Jesse, James, and Meowth from Pokemon. These guys are technically villains, but let's be honest, they're also some of the most beloved underdogs in all of anime. Sent as low-level operatives for a corrupt criminal empire, their actual mission is usually a comedy of errors involving Pikachu, a giant balloon, and some kind of absurd costume. And yet, underneath the slapstick, there's actually some substance. Jesse's childhood was marked by poverty, James ran away from a life of cold privilege, and Meowth literally taught himself to speak to impress someone who never loved him back. Just like the Rogues, they're goofball, misfit bad guys who really aren't that bad, and the Flash would see through to the heart underneath all their schemes and play along. They've got gadgets, disguises, and the occasional moment of surprising skill, but their real power lies in sheer persistence. Yeah, they always lose, but they never quit, and with a rotating roster of new Pokemon under their command every week, Flash will constantly have new powers to deal with, using Charizard and Aggron to demolish a bank vault and steal the money inside, getting Porygon to hack into Star Labs for their metahuman data to sell to the highest bidder, flooding streets with Blastoise, knocking out everyone at a fancy gala with Weezing's noxious fumes, not to mention the countless shenanigans they could cook up with their Ditto. You get the picture. I think Wally would genuinely love every time he runs into Jesse, James, and Meowth, and probably appreciate how low stakes their crimes tend to be, and enjoy finding homes for the various Pokemon after he stops them. Sort of like Lilo and Stitch did with the experiments in that one cartoon. Did anyone else ever watch that spin-off show? No? Ugh, maybe I'm getting old. Anyway, if we want to return to the speed angle, how about Enrico Pucci for our final villain? Friend of the monstrous Dio Brando, this JoJo villain inherited his will. He is a priest with a holy mission and a monster's resolve. Raised in faith but broken by tragedy, Pucci became a devoted follower of Dio after witnessing the miraculous powers of his vampirism and stand, and eventually he inherited Dio's philosophy as well, that true peace can only be achieved through predetermined fate. He wields a stand that evolves into Made in Heaven, a power that accelerates time itself to force the universe into a new cycle, one where everyone is aware of their destiny and powerless to change it. Pucci's abilities are abstract and reality-breaking. He essentially becomes a speedster, while the world around him speeds up too, only the other conscious organisms slowing down by comparison. I think this would be such a cool Flash story. Wally noticing time dilating before anyone else, zipping all around the world trying to solve it while things gradually get worse. He would eventually discover a series of murders and strange anomalies around Cape Canaveral, Florida, and once he finds the gravitational distortions caused by Made in Heaven, it would be too late. Time would be accelerating so quickly that everyone is without recourse, the sun and moon zipping by overhead. But Flash and Pucci would, relatively, have all the time in the world to discuss it. Pucci would explain the world he's creating, where everyone can live without fear because their fate is predetermined. And as the two clash, Flash would only figure out that the anomaly is originating from Pucci a second too late. The universe would reset. Here, now in a world where Wally's fate is sealed and he can't make any decisions for himself, his body would light up with the Speed Force and he would find Pucci again, explaining he knows what it's like to stare down his destiny, to live in the shadow of Barry Allen, to think his path was already carved out for him. But his greatest discovery? It was that he's not tied to Barry's legacy. He's not destined to live in his shadow, and he learned that by choosing his own path, putting one foot in front of the other and outpacing that supposed destiny. And now, the same Wally West who can outrun death itself is more than capable of outrunning fate. He's too fast to be affected by the reset universe, and dispatches with Pucci in a picosecond, just like Barry did before him, saving all of reality. And if you want to save me from working a boring 9-to-5 desk job for the rest of my life, why not join my channel membership, where you can help support what I do here. I really appreciate it. It helps justify the hours I spend on these scripts. You'll get to see more content like this weeks in advance, and other exclusive videos I'll never share with others. But if that doesn't interest you, maybe just hit that like button and subscribe. It's free, and you can always unsub down the line if you change your mind, right? Alright, moving on. Next, we have the Green Lantern Corps, an intergalactic peacekeeping force powered by will, 10,000 strong, chosen from across the universe to wield the most powerful weapon in existence, the Green Lantern Ring. These rings channel willpower to create anything the user can imagine, limited only by their focus and resolve. Earth, for reasons the Guardians of the Universe can barely explain, has produced not one, but 4 of the greatest lanterns to ever wield the ring. Hal Jordan is the classic, a fearless test pilot with a rebellious streak and an iron will. He leads with gut instinct and sheer nerve, the kind of guy who flies into a supernova without blinking. Guy Gardner is the brawler. Loud, brash, and seemingly allergic to authority, Guy is a walking contradiction. Rude as hell, but loyal to the core. John Stewart is the soldier and the architect. Precise, tactical, and grounded. A former Marine and trained engineer, John brings discipline and clarity to the core, projecting ring constructs with a level of detail and efficiency no one else can match. And Kyle Rayner is the artist, the everyman thrown into cosmic chaos. Chosen during the Corps' darkest hour, Kyle became the torchbearer who kept the legacy alive. His creativity makes his constructs wildly unique, and his emotional depth allows him to connect with parts of the emotional spectrum others can't touch. Together, they battle all sorts of threats to the Earth and the rest of the galaxy. Green Lantern villains are almost always from outer space, but they don't have to be. Their job is to protect and serve, fighting any threats that may disturb the peace, which is why I think they would be called by the Guardians of Oa on a mission to stop a deadly, bioorganic threat of hyper-evolutionary beings, but they'd be left scratching their heads when they're told the threat is back on Earth. The Chimera ants from Hunter x Hunter are a hybrid species that devours and assimilates the traits of whatever it eats. They evolve rapidly, each one more human and horrifying than the last. Meruem, king of the Chimera ants, is born a monarch and a monster, engineered to be the perfect predator, a being meant to dominate all life simply because he exists. Meruem is the pinnacle of their evolutionary process, physically unstoppable, intellectually unmatched, and initially incapable of seeing humans as anything more than livestock. He and his ants serve as the exact kind of threat the Lanterns are around to stop, even if he is homegrown. But most importantly, they aren't just physical specimens, they also have developed the use of Nen, supernatural powers using the body's natural aura to perform all sorts of incredible and terrifying feats. I think the ants and their vastly varied Nen powers would make for perfect antagonists against the Green Lantern Corps, whose rings can, in turn, create anything they can imagine. And while other heroes of the Earth might try and fight back against the invading ant armies, it's only the members of the Corps who possess the will to overcome the overwhelming fear generated by the ants' Nen projection. Like how Shia Poof can cause a mental breakdown in an experienced hunter with just his casual aura. The green light of will is the only thing that can push past fear that powerful. Kyle dispatching with Poof's thousands of tiny clones using his creative constructs, Guy having a knuckle-headed brawl with Yuppie, Hal pushing through the terrifying undead puppetry of Neferpito. Also, John gets a chance to face down Meruem. I think John, with his military mind, would be best suited to speak diplomatically to the king, to try and get him to surrender without the death of his species. Meruem would, of course, offer the same deal. Humans can surrender and they'll be kept like livestock, instead of being exterminated. Reaching this standstill, I don't see this going any other way than the Lanterns having to squash these bugs. It would be brutal and extremely difficult, a visceral, warlike experience, but it would bond the 4 of them together as brothers, which is what good GL stories always do. Next up, I wanted to stay on Earth a little bit longer, but introduce some alien spacefaring threats, and the perfect way to blend them? Gendo Ikari is the architect of the Human Instrumentality Project from Neon Genesis Evangelion. A man so consumed by loss that he's willing to rewrite the fabric of existence just to feel whole again. As the commander of NERV, Gendo orchestrates global military operations all centered around the invading alien forces known as Angels. But what no one but Gendo and a handful of powerful elites know is that these terrifying angels are actually just as terrestrial as humanity, born from a supernatural being known as Adam that crash-landed on Earth millennia ago, along with Lilith, the origin of humans. And when the right circumstances come to pass, merging a human with an angel using the power of his artificial angel creations known as Evangelions, human instrumentality will occur, transforming all people into a single consciousness. Gendo spends billions of military dollars and countless lives to build the Avas and frame the Angels as an invading force. Also, he can achieve human instrumentality to be reunited with his deceased wife once again. So when the Angels begin attacking the Earth and the Green Lanterns show up to stop them, they'd be very puzzled to see the giant purple robots showing up to assist them, and at first probably work alongside Gendo and NERV to defeat the first few Angels. But as they ask more questions, Hal never settling for the bullshit Gendo tries to feed them, eventually it'll all slip, and the Lanterns will be forced to fight the gigantic Avas, Kyle making his own mech constructs to knock them around, while the two opposing sides have to fend off more invading angels. These mysterious, godlike beings who descend one by one to challenge humanity's right to exist. As Guy and John uncover the depths of Gendo's evil, they might question the very same, repulsed by how dark the human heart can be. Each angel is unique, unpredictable, and terrifying in its own way. Some are brute force, others psychological or metaphysical puzzles, perfect for the versatility of lantern rings. Together, Gendo and the Angels would form a two-pronged assault, one from within, one from beyond, that our four corpsmen would have to fight tooth and nail to not only stop, but reconcile with their humanity and the nature of their separate wills in the process. What if instrumentality happens, and Hal is the only one able to bring himself back? His will so strong that he manages to find himself amidst the mass human consciousness, a sort of inverse of his Emerald Twilight storyline. He goes and gets the Guardians of Oa to help him restore the people of Earth from their lost state within instrumentality. And afterwards, seeing the true potential of Hal and the other three Earthling Lanterns, the Guardians would decide to trust them with the current greatest evil threatening to stamp out lives all across the universe. The anti-spiral race from Gurren Lagann. I mean, come on, how could I not include this one? The anti-spiral isn't a single person, it's a population of godlike alien beings that achieved ultimate power, and decided that power was too great for anyone else to ever wield. A cosmic rejection of evolution itself, they are a collective consciousness that chose stagnation over annihilation. They once embraced spiral energy, the power of limitless growth and potential. The anti-spiral turned on its own kind after realizing that unchecked progress would eventually lead to the collapse of the universe. Now it exists to enforce total suppression, locking civilizations in place and snuffing out anything that dares to dream bigger. Its powers are overwhelming and metaphysical: reality warping, teleportation, manipulation of probability, and control over time and space itself. And their targets are currently placed squarely on Oa, and every planet across creation that's protected by a Green Lantern. Recognizing the green light of willpower as a form of spiral power, they want to crush this fledgling grasp at something more, erase and oppress it to prevent the threat of evolution. All the Lanterns across the universe would be called to deal with this threat, throwing everything in the kitchen sink against the anti-spirals, 10,000 of them fighting giant mechas, spaceships, probability-altering missiles, until eventually they are all trapped within the multiversal labyrinth. But all the while, one lone Lantern was sent off on a special mission. Kyle Rayner, tasked with the Guardians' last-ditch Hail Mary plan to collect and master one of each of the Lantern rings of the emotional spectrum to achieve the white light of life. It's only by mastering each of the emotions, rage, greed, fear, will, hope, compassion, and love, is Kyle able to discover the power of life, transformed into the White Lantern. Now, with godly power of his own, he would be able to tackle the anti-spiral, saving all of the Green Lanterns, and prove to them that their ideology of oppression and regression could never stand up against the unwavering light of life and freedom. Speaking of a champion of freedom, Wonder Woman is a living myth, a bridge between the ancient and modern worlds, a symbol of truth in a world built on compromise. Born Diana of Themyscira, she's an Amazonian princess sculpted from clay and given life by the gods. Raised on an island untouched by time, surrounded by warrior women devoted to peace and justice, Diana enters the world of man as a protector instead of a conqueror. Her mission? To show that strength and compassion can coexist. She's incredibly powerful, strength and speed in a similar league as Superman, with a mind for combat and strategy approaching Batman's, all tied together with a diplomatic nature and a set of godly tools: the indestructible bracelets, her invisible jet, and most importantly, the lasso of truth, which compels honesty from anyone it binds. But Wonder Woman's greatest power is moral clarity. Where others hesitate or compromise, she always acts out of an unwavering belief in doing what's right, even when it's impossible. If Superman is about kindness, Wonder Woman is about optimism, and I think that's exactly what we should focus on when choosing anime villains that challenge her. In a world full of cynics, soldiers, and self-doubt, Wonder Woman remains a warrior who always extends her hand to help before reaching for her sword. Now, I don't normally do this, but I wanted to include an honorable mention here. I have 3 really good picks for Wonder Woman villains, but my 4th one is almost too good to not include. Unfortunately, she's mostly relegated to manga at the moment, and I don't want to spoil the anime onlys, so I'll keep it brief. Makima from Chainsaw Man would be a phenomenal Wonder Woman villain. Not only would their fights be some of the coolest shit you've ever seen, lassos and chains and all that, but I think their discussions on the nature of love and control would be genuinely fascinating. But that's it. Moving on to my first real pick, Eren Yeager of Attack on Titan. Eren begins as a boy screaming for freedom, watching helplessly as his world is ripped apart by titans, but by the end, he's the one shaking the world to its core. Once driven by vengeance and idealism, Eren's journey twists into something far more complex as he uncovers the truth about the Titans, the walls, and the cycle of violence his people are trapped in. With the power of the founding Titan, he gains control over time, memory, and entire armies of colossal giants, turning himself into a weapon of apocalyptic scale, all focused on flattening the world and its people to finally achieve the freedom he's always longed for. Now, there is no Paradis or Marley in the world of DC, so instead, I can see Eren as a radical military extremist from the country of Zandia, punished by its neighboring countries for centuries because it was the birthplace of the Church of Blood, and in his rage against the Baravian and Pakolistani peoples who attacked and abused his countrymen for his whole life, Eren used the Church of Blood's dark magic to unlock the power of the Titans, creating his army of colossal monsters to stomp out the rest of humanity in a rumbling. At first, his attacks would begin using only the shifters, Wonder Woman stopping the mighty armored Titan in its tracks with her shield, the ground shattering beneath her as she sends him back flying. This is where she would first meet Eren, the man the Zandian Jaegerists were named after. She would try to talk him down diplomatically, to understand the injustices his people have suffered for years, and to come to a peaceful conclusion. But when he refuses her help, she would be forced to take down his shifter generals, giving Eren just long enough to escape and plan his final move, the rumbling. Diana would have to petition her fellow heroes to help evacuate the countries surrounding Zandia while she went to confront Eren directly, inside the founding Titan. Obviously, it would be incredible watching her climb up the giant skeletal monster, battling all the incarnations of the 9 shifters atop his back, and making her way to the head to face down Eren for good. Diana would definitely be willing to cut him down to save the world, but before she did, I think she would promise him justice for his people, and an end to the generational hatred that turned him into this monster in the first place. But some villains aren't victims of the world. Some villains willingly give up their humanity, like Dio Brando of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. Originally a poor British child with a vile and abusive father, Dio decided early on that he would never let himself be a victim, choosing to scheme, steal, and kill whoever he needed to achieve the luxury and power he always craved. Dio rejected his humanity early on, choosing to use the mystic power of a stone mask to become a vampiric monster with the power to regenerate, create zombie soldiers and freakish mutant pets, and live forever under the cover of night. Eventually, he even awoke the supernatural power of a stand, the world, granting him even greater strength, speed, spectral abilities, and the power to stop time. But Dio's real weapon is his charisma, the way he infects others with his ambition and bends them to his will. I think Dio's ability to rule his subjects through fear, undying loyalty, and disgusting flesh buds would make for a great moral challenge for Wonder Woman. She would need to wrestle with the choice to kill the countless stand users protecting Dio, knowing they aren't all willing participants, or use her people skills to convince them to turn on their demagogue. And when Diana finally meets Dio, oh, they'd have some great interactions. A man who grasps at godhood, facing down a woman sculpted by the gods, making the argument that Wonder Woman should embrace her power and the authority it would grant her over others. She too could become as beloved and feared as Dio, operating in the shadows, offers a certain comfort that he would try to tempt her with, as he uses the world to freeze time and pummel her from all angles. But Diana is so fast that she would catch him anyway, shrugging off his strikes and slicing him with her holy holy blade, until he's eventually able to be dragged into the light, as she explains that hiding in the dark amidst the shadows is essentially like living a lie. That's all Dio's ever been, a liar who tried to tell himself he was more than human, when his humanity could have been the best thing about him. Honestly, I really like the undead angle of a villain for Diana. It makes her potential lethality less viable, and contrasts how she's a champion of life. But I also really like the idea of Wonder Woman fighting a revolutionary on a battlefield, waging a war against an opponent with an ideology. So I decided that her archenemy would have both. Madara Uchiha from Naruto. Madara is the ghost of a dream gone wrong, the legendary shinobi who helped build the Hidden Leaf Village only to become its greatest threat. A prodigy of the Uchiha clan, Madara was shaped by endless war and the death of his brother, leading him to believe that true peace could never come from trust or diplomacy, only control. He dies in a climactic battle and is thought of only as a myth, but returns hundreds of years later as a ghostly threat that almost annihilates the whole world. Wielding the eternal Mangekyo Sharingan, the Rinnegan, and later the power of the Ten Tails itself, he can summon meteors, trap entire armies in illusions, and using Hashirama's DNA, shrug off death like it's a mild inconvenience. All for his final goal, the infinite Tsukuyomi. Because Madara believes the world is eternally bound to a cycle of hatred and death, he wants to cast a genjutsu on the moon, a spell that will trap every single person in a living dream for all eternity. He's literally a walking rejection of the concept of truth. How could I not pit him up against Diana? I think his legendary level Sharingan that could conquer the Nine Tails would be perfectly countered by the Lasso of Truth, Diana clutching it tight to resist his genjutsus. The two clashing as he drops gigantic meteors and blows enormous fireballs, or even better, Diana rides the flying Pegasus to battle him as he summons his mighty Susanoo. Obviously, this would be the coolest fight ever, but because Madara is undead, Diana couldn't just kill him. She would have to capture him and seal him away, perhaps in the depths beneath Themyscira, or literally in the underworld with Hades. But the threat of his escape would constantly be looming, the threat of the eternal dream, always chomping at the bit to tear down truth once again. But that's enough with gods and monsters. Let's look at what one man with a mission can do. Batman is the shadow that criminals fear, the myth that stalks Gotham's alleyways, the man who turned his tragedy into a life of heroism. Bruce Wayne watched his parents' murders in front of him as a child, and that single moment shaped everything that followed. He became a detective, a strategist, and a symbol of both hope and fear. Batman's arsenal is vast: advanced technology, fear tactics, martial arts mastery, and an intimate understanding of the criminal mind. He operates out of the Batcave beneath Wayne Manor, stalks the city in the Batmobile, and keeps contingency plans for everyone and everything, including his friends. But his real weapon is preparation. He's always thinking 10 steps ahead, always calculating the best angle, always ready to make the impossible decision that no one else can. And yet, under all the armor and brooding silence, he's a man who never really moved on from that alley. A good Batman villain is one that offers him a mystery to solve, a monster to take down, and a deeper look inside the psychology of evil, and how dangerously close his psychology can come to theirs if he's not careful. When considering Batman villains, I wanted someone that could be a reasonable physical challenge for him. I'm not having the Dark Knight tangle with Sukuna or Majin Buu, but I also wanted villains that Batman could psychologically profile in an attempt to understand what makes them tick. The reason he locks away villains in Arkham Asylum isn't just because he refuses to kill. He does genuinely believe in rehabilitation, and I want anime villains that would pique his interest in that arena. First up, if Batman is a hero who hunts villains, what about a villain who hunts heroes? Stain, the hero killer of My Hero Academia, is less a villain and more a walking manifesto. A zealot with a blade, slicing through the hypocrisy he sees in the world of pro-heroes. Once a passionate idealist who believed in true justice, Stain became disillusioned by the commercialization and ego that tainted the hero profession. Now he hunts those he deems unworthy, paralyzing his victims with his quirk, Blood Curdle. He only needs to taste a drop of your blood to completely seize your body in place. I think Batman would start by looking into the disappearance of various street-tier heroes from Bloodhaven and Star City, but make the case a top priority when it starts happening to Gotham heroes. I think he would track down Stain mid-kill, while he has a hero like Wildcat or Ragman paralyzed, and the two would get in a scrap. They would talk about Stain's desire to see a world of true heroes, how no one lives up to the perfect ideal set by Superman, and Bruce would have plenty to say about this freak killing in the name of his friend. I think Stain is a great physical match for Batman because one wrong move and he's cooked. Stain managing to slash Bruce in the torso and lick his blade, Batman freezing in place as Stain slowly monologues while he approaches to make the final strike, but as he's about to, Batman springs to life again, landing a powerful combo and wrapping him up in a trap. Of course, Batman knew how Stain's quirk worked and prepared some fake blood, ripping his own suit to sell the illusion. It's a classic Batman fight, and Stain would make for a great recurring villain and eventually anti-hero. I can see him coming to realize Batman's endless pursuit of justice and accepting him as a hero on par with Superman, making him a wild card in any situation where he pops up in Gotham in the future. Of course, I know we're all thinking it, there's no replacing the Joker in Bruce's rogues gallery. There are countless unhinged anime villains, but none specifically designed to be Batman's opposite. That said, we can come kinda close. Chickalada from JoJo's Bizarre Adventure is pure malice in a lab coat, a sadistic former surgeon who turned medicine into murder and cruelty into an art form. Once a respected doctor, he used his position to exploit and torment his patients, extending their symptoms and torturing them silently, finding joy in their suffering long before he ever joined the gang Passion. With his stand, Green Day, he spreads a flesh-rotting mold that activates whenever his victims descend in elevation, turning the simple act of walking downhill into a death sentence. And if that isn't the exact kind of bullshit you'd need someone like Batman to figure out on the fly, I don't know what is. Only his genius tactical mind could do something like that while dodging flying scalpels and adapt mid-fight to only ascend. He'd be forced to think creatively, using his grapnel gun and the Gotham architecture to keep the fight moving higher and higher, the risk of elevating with every second passing. Falling doesn't just mean crashing into the ground below, but being eaten up by flesh parasites before his bat body can even make it halfway. And I think Chickalada is also the perfect kind of madman to play off against Batman's cold and unflinching mantle of justice. He delights in watching people die slowly, recording their agony with glee like he's capturing a masterpiece, which is why it would be so satisfying to see Batman finally catch up to him after weeks of research and tracking, countless brutal murders, overcoming the ridiculous power of his stand, and finally punching that clown in the face. But it's that exact type of cold, unflinching justice that makes my next pick the absolute perfect arch-enemy for Batman. Another man who, instead of embracing justice, hides behind it to fuel his god complex. Light Yagami, the serial killer Kira from Death Note. Light and Bruce are sort of like mirrors of one another, both genius prodigies, gifted athletes, and strategic masterminds, both born to loving, wealthy families, but where Bruce had his parents taken from him, Light never suffered a single tragedy in his entire life. Instead, he stumbled upon a gift from beyond the grave, the Death Note, that gives him the power to kill anyone by writing their name as long as he knows that name and what they look like. At first, he believes he's creating a better world by erasing criminals, reshaping society with divine precision. But it doesn't take long for that sense of justice to rot into self-worship. Light becomes Kira, judge, jury, and executioner of the world, killing not out of moral need or some utilitarian necessity, but to protect his image and authority. Light is calculating, manipulative, and always 10 steps ahead. Combined with the supernatural and immutable power of the Notebook, it practically transforms him into a dark force of nature, but still a very mortal one. As much as Light likes to call himself God of the New World, he's just a guy, and if Batman can manage to track down this Kira, worshipped all over the world by people who support his genocidal mission, it would be game over in a moment. And conversely, when Batman stumbles onto his trail, the clock starts ticking. If Light can manage to use the Death Note to manipulate the deaths of people all around the world, he might be able to manufacture a way to discover Batman's secret identity. So the game is on. Whoever discovers the other's identity first wins. The world's greatest detective versus the self-proclaimed god of that world. And the best part? What makes Light so compelling is that he never sees himself as the villain. He thinks he deserves to rule, because in his eyes, no one else is worthy. So when Bruce finally manages to track him down, to tear through all his bravado, strip away his countermeasures like the secret scrap of note hidden in his watch, and all his other contingencies, Kira will be forced to face the truth. Light will yield to the dark night. Stay frosty.